If you guys didn't know, there's been many professional football leagues outside of the NFL. Which ones were direct competitors, and which ones were complementary leagues to the National Football League? My boy, CC, is in the house again. He's going to break it down for you today on the Gametime Guru. So,
what time is it? Game time! Woo!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Gametime Guru. Once again, I'm your host, Shane Larson, and before we get started, you guys know the drill. You got to find me on social media. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, any one of those outlets if you want to follow me on a daily basis. Instagram, I'm trying to give you a more behind-the-scenes look at what I'm doing on the day-to-day. Also, you can find me on the Bronco Nation News podcast. I'm going to be doing a Bronco Nation News Facebook Live video every week before the games start, so you can find me there if you're a Boise State football fan. But make sure to also find me on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, any one of those platforms. You can find me there. Subscribe to the podcast. Why? Because it's much more convenient to listen to it there than it is to listen to it on Facebook. And a big reason why is because on those platforms, you can actually listen to it at 2 times speed, so you don't have to listen to it all. You know, if it's 40 minutes long, you can cut that down to 20 minutes if you just listen to it with 2x speed. I know a lot of people like to do that, including myself, so make sure to go subscribe, and please leave me a review. All right, guys, so once again, I am joined by the great CC Hawkley, and I want to talk about some of the work that he's done so far. You guys know him. He's been on the show before, but let's take a look at some of the articles that CC's written for us here on the Gametime Guru. Article number 1, FC Boise, the Hawks blueprint to bring minor league soccer to the city of trees. Go check it out on thegametimeguru.com. He's got that article. He's got another one called Just Win in Vegas, Baby, the Major League's Exodus to Sin City. And you also want to check out Hockey in America, the United States Dilemma, and Promoting Canada's Game. All right, and he also has some guest appearances. Like I said, you've heard him on the show. If not, check out episode 15, Hockey Talk with CC Hawkley, as well as episode 21, Face Off with CC Hawkley. But he has been on the show. He's here with me again. CC, thank you for coming on.
Hey, Shane, glad to be back. This is the third time I'm here, and episode 29. You're almost to 30, man.
Almost to 30.
It's kind of crazy. But, yeah, it's been a joy listening to it. And, you know, after kind of the heavy topic that you had last week with the protests and everything, it's good to kind of take a step back. We're still talking football, but
Right.
It'll be good to kind of ease into what we've got to talk about today.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm happy to have you here to kind of make it more of a fun, informative transition from the heavy topic last week. So thanks for joining me, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No doubt, dude. And before we get started, in case you guys don't know CC very well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get to know him. A few quick questions to get the show on the road. So you ready for this one?
I am ready.
All right.
Lay it on me.
So, CC, you mentioned you were a Utah Jazz fan growing up. Outside of John Stockton, Karl Malone, who was your favorite Jazz player in the glory days?
I'm going to say Jeff Hornacek.
All right.
Jeff Hornacek, you know, obviously he's a head coach in the NBA now, and he always kind of had that field general sort of vibe to him. And, you know, John Stockton is and will always be my favorite NBA player, but I think Jeff Hornacek is kind of modeled in the same way. You know, great three-point shooter, you know, just really a solid team player, and obviously a good coach. And, well, he's a coach for the Knicks, so good is a relative term.
Well, he does his job.
He does his job, yes.
Yeah, I liked Hornacek as well. Just to stay on that topic real quick, Brian Russell. He was my favorite. Had his jersey. He outside of the main guys, Russell was my boy, dude.
Russell was solid, too.
I love Russell.
Absolutely.
Man, the glory days.
The glory days.
All right, CC, in your opinion, who's the greatest athlete to ever play? Doesn't matter which sport, which athlete.
You know, I'm going to go back almost 100 years for this. I'm going to say Jim Thorpe. And the reason I'm saying Jim Thorpe is because he won 2 gold medals in the 1912 Olympics in the decathlon and the pentathlon. He also played professionally in basketball, football, and baseball. You want to talk about the best athlete of all time? Go do some research on Jim Thorpe, and you will be thoroughly impressed, no doubt.
All-purpose athlete.
For sure. I mean, you asked me who the best athlete was, and Jim Thorpe, he typified that 100 years before LeBron James.
I like it.
Or Tom Brady, or name your, Bryce Harper.
Jim Thorpe. It's the first time I've heard that, but I like the reasoning. Remind everyone who your favorite professional football team is real quick.
That would be the Denver Broncos.
That said, okay, so he's a Denver Broncos fan. I want you to let us know who's the greatest quarterback of all time with that, because you guys had a great quarterback in your histories of the Broncos, and I'm curious to see your opinion on this. Who was the greatest quarterback of all time?
You know, John Elway and Peyton Manning were both Hall of Fame. You know, they're up there on the top 10, top 20 list of great quarterbacks of all time. You know, it's timely, and obviously they're a rival, but I'm going to go with Tom Brady. I know. I know. I hate saying it. I do. Trust me. Being a Denver fan, I hate confessing to it. But when you win 5 Super Bowls, when you can play at the caliber that he does at age 40,
yes,
you know, I mean, it puts Brett Favre's longevity down a notch. It puts, you know, Peyton Manning, it puts John Elway, it puts them just a step below. Even Joe Montana. You know, I would say it's Tom Brady 1, Joe Montana 2.
All right.
I would. Just based on the accolades of taking their teams to a Super Bowl on a consistent basis, or at least to the playoffs on a consistent basis, I'm going to reluctantly say Tom Brady.
Okay. I'm just going to be completely honest here. I have to just – okay. I did an episode a long time ago, like when I first started the podcast, on why I just kind of, you know, debated whether or not Tom Brady was the greatest of all time. Mm-hmm. I've got to say right now, though, Grandpa's getting it done. All right. He's still performing. His team's not doing too hot, but he's still performing extremely well. Like the first 4 games, I've actually been extremely impressed, and it stems back to the Super Bowl. Started off terrible, finished strong.
Right.
Now he's still kicking. I may have to change my opinion. I'm going to wait, but I'm not a Tom Brady fan, but I understand with the reasons that you said, like he is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. I was just wondering, because of John Elway and Peyton Manning being on the Broncos in that organization, what your thoughts were. So that's good to know. I mean, at least you're a true sports fan, and you have the respect, even if it's a division or not a division rival, the conference rival.
Conference rival,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, speaking of quarterbacks, I want to touch base on Kurt Warner real quick. Now, this guy played for the Iowa Barnstormers in the Arena Football League in the mid-'90s, the Amsterdam Admirals in the NFL Europe, which we might talk about here in just a little bit, right? He made his way to the NFL. And just a few months back, we had the Pro Football Hall of Fame that was in Canton, and he was inducted, and he gave his speech. And I want to quote Kurt Warner because it's going to get us into our discussion today. This is what Kurt Warner said. This is it's a very, very small snippet of the speech that he gave, but I quote, "I, possibly more than anyone else up here, embrace that I am inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Not just the NFL Hall of Fame. I wear that as a badge of honor, because without pro football in all its forms and fashions, I'm not here tonight." What do you mean by pro football? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. The king of all professional football leagues is the NFL. And on a previous episode of mine, I mentioned how the UFC is like what I would say the Amazon of the mixed martial arts industry. The NFL, or the National Football League, is the quote-unquote Amazon of the professional football industry. And every other league that's coexisted during the time of the NFL has fallen into 2 categories. It's either a competitor or it's a complementary league, right?
Correct.
So, okay,
yes.
so
Yeah, you got it.
Did I say that right? All right.
Shane was looking over at me like, is that correct?
Did I say that right? Okay.
You got it, man.
Complementary or a competitor. And today we're going to break this down, and we're going to go in chronological order, and we're going to of all these, we're going to discuss the different professional football leagues that have existed during the time of the NFL and whatnot. And we're going to talk about whether or not they're a complementary league or a competitor. So I got CC here. He's going to break it down for you with all his knowledge, as he always does. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, my man. So let's start off with, can you just give us a background of, organized professional football real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the late 1800s or the 1890s going into the 1910s, football was a very regional thing when it came to leagues. So it was a lot kind of like minor league baseball. You have the Pacific Coast League, and then you've got all the Atlantic leagues and everything. It was kind of the same thing in pro football. You had your Pennsylvania League, you had your New York, Ohio, Michigan, Chicago, Green Bay. It was very territorial. And the NFL kind of rose from that regional territorial, vibe that pro football gave off. And it was founded in 1920 as American Professional Football Association, or the APFA, and it converged into the NFL into 1922. And you had your Chicago Bears, you had your your Green Bay Packers. Chicago went by something different. They went by the Decatur the Decatur Staleys.
What?
Yeah, they went by the Decatur
Okay.
Staleys, and then they eventually morphed into Chicago Bears. But back in the early 1900s, they were the Decatur Staleys. So
Early 1900s, man. The NFL has been around for a very long time.
correct,
That's crazy.
it's true.
All right, man. So you guys have a brief understanding of how professional football and the NFL started, when it started. We're going to break into the AFL. Break it down for us, CC.
The American Football League. So there was actually three prior instances of the American Football League, 1926, 1936, and 1940. The fourth incarnation is the most well-known, the one that was established in 1960.
Okay.
And it was started by owners who were not granted an NFL franchise in different cities and places like that, or they actually had a minor stake in current, or at least at the time, current NFL franchises. So you were looking at kind of the first actual rival to the NFL.
Okay.
So they actually signed 3/4 of the NFL's first-round draft choices, including Heisman Trophy winner Billy Cannon signing with the Houston Oilers back in 1960. So they were legitimate right out of the gate. So they had 8 initial teams. They had contracts with both ABC and NBC at separate times. They had successful teams. They had successful team moves, I should say. You know, it's hard to navigate, teams moving sometimes, but they actually had success from the Houston Texans moving to, not the Houston Texans, sorry, the Houston team going to Kansas City.
Okay.
And then the LA team that they had going to San Diego. The LA
LA
Chargers.
team going to San Diego?
Yes, yeah. The
Oh.
Chargers were actually the LA Chargers for their first season in the NFL, or the AFL, excuse me. And they actually moved to San Diego after their first season.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, don't you think? Yes, it is, history coming back around again. So, yeah, the rebranding of the New York Titans to the New York Jets, and then Miami joining the league in 1966 to expand the league to 9 teams. Yeah, they were legitimately building up, momentum to really challenge the NFL. Atlanta actually had a bid to join the AFL, and the NFL actually outbid the AFL to have the Atlanta Falcons join the NFL instead of the AFL.
Really?
So, yeah, back in 1965. The merge between the two leagues actually began in 1966 after Dallas Cowboys GM Tex Schramm and other NFL owners held a secret meeting to merge the leagues together over the next few years. Hence why Super Bowls 1 through 4 were NFL versus AFL. You had, Green Bay versus Kansas City, Green Bay versus Oakland, the New York Jets versus the Baltimore Colts, and the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Bengals joined the AFL in 1968, and the AFL actually became the AFC in 1970. All 10 teams, plus Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore, who each got $3 million to join the AFC, which isn't too bad of a deal. And lo and behold, you had your American Football Conference, and the NFL became the overarching league over the NFC and the AFC.
Isn't that interesting how the history of that it all came together?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about some rule changes here real quick in regards to these.
Yeah, so the AFL was actually the first league to adopt names on the back of player jerseys, which the NFL, of course, then adopted as well. They used the stadium scoreboard for their game clock, not just the stopwatches like the NFL was using at the time. Seems like a duh sort of thing, but the AFL was actually predating the NFL doing that. They had a 14-game schedule, which was unheard of at the time. I think the NFL had a 12-game schedule. And they actually used the 2-point conversion 34 years before the NFL instituted it in 1994.
That's crazy to me because just you stating all that information, it almost seems like the AFL was ahead of the game. Well, the game as we know it today, they were ahead of the game compared to the NFL, but the NFL basically kind of absorbed it.
Right. Yeah, there was talks for a merger, in regards to the AFL having franchises in cities where the NFL did not. And to realize, hey, this is, salaries are going up in both of our leagues. So what do we need to do? Let's merge. It makes sense business-wise. So.
I like it. So tell me right now then, you've mentioned a couple words that I heard you say, rival. They were there to challenge it, but then they merged. Is the AFL a competitor or a complementary league? Was it a competitor or a complementary league to the National Football League?
It was straight up a competitor. I
Okay.
mean, yes, I didn't say it in so many words because we were kind of leaving that till the end of each league, but it was straight up a competitor. For sure. They were rivaling the league until they finally realized, both leagues, that, you know what, it makes more business sense to merge. And so they did. And that's kind of why they started it in 1966, easing into it with the Super Bowls. And now we have the NFC and the AFC because of it.
It's really interesting. So hopefully you guys that are listening learned something there, because it almost sounds like the AFL could have probably continued to compete, but there, sometimes when you're going on, head on with that train, eventually something's got to give. And I think they made a decision that was good for both leagues. Obviously, now look what it's grown into. It's
correct.
Huge.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Benefited both of them quite well.
It's crazy, man. Crazy information as always. All right, let's go to the ACFL. What is the ACFL?
So the ACFL stands for Atlantic Coast Football League, and it was a league that existed between 1962 and 1973. And initially it worked as a farm system, kind of like minor league baseball. Once again, it worked as a farm system for both the NFL and the AFL. And it had a whole bevy of franchises from Atlanta to Portland, Maine, and right up and down the, you guessed it, the Atlantic Coast, just like the name connotates. So some teams had some active minor league affiliations with the New York Jets, Baltimore Colts, Buffalo Bills, New York Giants, Boston Patriots, Philadelphia Eagles, New Orleans Saints, and the Washington Redskins.
All right, so I think it's kind of written there for us, but is it a competitive or complementary league?
The writing is on the wall. It was most definitely a complementary league.
Do you have any information on why they went away with that? Was it just not working? Did you hear anything about that by chance when you were researching it? Because I'm not too familiar with it, and I'm wondering, even today in the NFL, we're wondering why we can't get a farm system of some kind. Maybe we'll go into it more. I'm just wondering why it didn't. It just seems like a good idea to me. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it just financially, you'll notice a pattern here. A lot of financial reasons for these leagues not sticking around.
Okay.
It's just it wasn't fiscally
finances.
Yeah, it wasn't fiscally responsible for these owners to continue these, minor leagues. But some of them, they were competitors for other minor leagues too. And we'll kind of get into that as well.
Good.
For sure.
All right. What is this one? The CoFL? The CoFL? How do you pronounce it, man? Will you tell us about this?
Well, it's different than the CFL, so I think that's why the abbreviation was C, lowercase OFL,
Okay.
stands for Continental Football League.
Right.
So this one existed between 65 and 69, and it actually had the only ever Mexican professional football team, the Mexico Golden Aztecs. But that was after they absorbed the Texas Football League, and it was only for one season in 1969. They also had teams in Montreal, Victoria, British Columbia, and Hawaii, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, they actually had Ken Stabler, who won a Super Bowl with the Oakland Raiders. They had him on the Spokane Shockers, and that was a team that, obviously out of Spokane, Washington, had a young Ken Stabler on their squad. Other markets they had was Sacramento, Eugene, Oregon, Seattle, Long Beach, California, San Jose, and Anaheim. Once again, all markets that did not have NFL franchises at that time.
At that time. It was all across the west coast of the United States there. And then obviously Montreal, Victoria, Hawaii that you said before.
Correct.
Mexico. That's interesting because Mexico apparently has we've heard it before, are they going to put a National Football League team there, whatever?
Right.
Apparently they have a good fan base.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Maybe that stems from way back then.
It possibly,
I'm sure it does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the CoFL, the Continental Football League, competitor or complementary league?
They were actually a direct competitor to the NFL and the AFL. And once the NFL and AFL started the merge talks, the Continental Football League just lost steam. That's why they only lasted 4 years.
All right. What about the WFL?
The WFL was a short little league, 1974 to 1975. They are the World Football League. So they actually, this was kind of the first threat to the NFL after the AFL merger. It was,
right.
it was only 4 or 5 years after the merger completed, but the World Football League, let me give you some info on it, and I can share how it was. It changed the landscape. I was really surprised when I was doing my research how much, in such a short period of time, how much the WFL really messed things up for the NFL.
All right.
So they actually lured a lot of NFL talent And they raised salaries in the NFL along the way, with something they were trying to avoid with the AFL as well. They signed 3 players from the defending Super Bowl champion Miami Dolphins: fullback Larry Zonka, halfback Jim Kick, and wide receiver Paul Warfield.
Wow.
Yeah, so they just did a talent grab right out of Miami, which affected it because then that gave the Dallas Cowboys, that gave the Pittsburgh Steelers an in to raise their heads as competitors in the NFL and viable Super Bowl contenders, which obviously they won 3 each in the 70s.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that was huge. Kenny Stabler, who I mentioned earlier in the Continental Football League, he signed with the Birmingham Americans, Birmingham, Alabama. The Cowboys lost quarterback Craig Morton and running back Calvin Hill to teams in Houston and Hawaii, respectively. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the ACFL, the WFL's existence caused the ACFL and another minor league football league, the Seaboard Football League, or the SFL, they caused them to fold after luring away talent from the minor leagues as well, because yeah, it's just the talent grab that the World Football League did in such a short amount of time is actually, it's pretty remarkable how they pulled it off. But yeah, they established themselves in big markets like Chicago, Detroit, Houston, New York, and some of the smaller markets like the aforementioned Birmingham, Alabama, Jacksonville, Florida, Hawaii, Portland, Oregon, and Memphis. I mean, yeah, it was short but sweet, though. I mean, like I said, they folded in 1975. Low attendance, teams were ceasing operations and overspending on players. You know, they wanted to lure the big names over, so they just would drop all this money. Again, if you're sensing a theme that is arising from this topic, then, you know, overplaying players is definitely going to be one of them. So
that is crazy to me. The city, okay, I'm looking at the small markets that we referenced, right? Birmingham, Jacksonville, Hawaii, Portland. Birmingham. You and I were talking about this before the podcast. What else is in Birmingham? What else is around Birmingham, Alabama, as far as football?
Oh, I don't know. The Alabama Crimson Tide.
Exactly. You got Auburn just down the road too.
Correct. Right.
I mean, maybe that had a direct impact. And I wonder. My wife and I was talking to CC about this. So for listeners, I was talking about this with my wife as far as like why there isn't a professional football team there. And I said, you know, well, Alabama is their professional football team. So is Auburn. You know, like that's their professional football teams. I wonder if that had a direct impact. I mean, the history of, you know, collegiate football in those cities, like in that city specifically.
Oh, possibly. Yeah. This definitely wasn't the first foray of a professional or semi-professional league going into Birmingham, Alabama. Stay tuned.
Oh, okay. So we got more coming that way. All right. So the WFL, you know, straight threat to the NFL, obviously the ACFL. So would we say competitor or complementary?
Definitely a competitor. I mean, once you lure NFL talent away and you're trying to establish markets in NFL cities and non-NFL cities, I would say you're definitely a direct competitor. But once again, they were, you know, a quick little burning flame that just fizzled out real fast. Man,
and the NFL stayed standing strong. Okay.
You got it.
AFA.
Alrighty. So the AFA, the American Football Association, lasted from 1977 to 1983. They played on Saturday nights in the summer from Memorial Day weekend to August. They were a deeply southern league. So you had teams in Oklahoma, Alabama, Kentucky, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi, Virginia, Louisiana, West Virginia, and Chicago.
One of these things is not
like the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Chicago, Illinois. So many clubs lasted just one season, if that. And they actually existed for a season or two about the same time as the USFL, which we'll be getting into after this. But yeah, it was a pretty unstable league in regards to just clubs folding, not lasting even a season. So yeah, deeply southern league though, which obviously, you know, the market wasn't quite broached yet for the NFL to join in putting more clubs and more NFL squads in the Sun Belt.
Right. And the fact that they played at a different time of the year, as we mentioned, like more towards the summer, well, with that being said, and the fact that they were, you know, hitting a new market, are we saying competitor or complementary?
We are saying complementary.
Okay.
Because they were specifically focusing on markets that were not NFL markets, and like you said, they played in the summertime, so they're not trying to compete with the NFL playing in the fall and into the winter.
Nice. And you mentioned USFL. That's our next one. USFL. Let's talk about this.
All right, the USFL, the major competitor. I just gave it away.
Let's talk about it. I like it.
If you've seen the 30 for 30 small potatoes, why the USFL failed on ESPN, then you already know that the USFL was a major competitor to the National Football League in the 1980s. They existed from 1982 to 1986. Initially, they had a spring-summer schedule, but they were looking to play the 1986 season in the fall and the winter, which we'll get into in just a second.
Okay.
So New Orleans businessman David Dixon in 1965 actually had the idea to have a league play in the spring and summertime. Now, Dixon was instrumental in the construction of the Super Bowl. Super Bowl? That's not what I meant to say. Superdome.
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 Gotcha.
The construction of the Superdome and bringing an NFL franchise to New Orleans. So Dixon, this idea, some owners in the 80s were like, hey, let's get a spring, summertime league going, and we'll go from there. So some notable players that you will recognize: Jim Kelly.
Yes.
Former Buffalo Bills glory. He played for the Houston Gamblers. Steve Young.
Yes.
Former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, played for the LA Express. Doug Flutie. You eating your Flutie Flakes still? Because that box has got to be years old by now. He played for the New Jersey Generals. Reggie White, one of the best linemen of all time, number 92 for the Green Bay Packers, played for the Memphis Showboats. And Herschel Walker played for the New Jersey Generals as well.
Herschel Walker, hello, people, one of the better running backs and more well-known. I'm a Cowboys fan, so. Yeah,
obviously.
So I mean, he's a big name. These are big names that were in the USFL.
Yeah. And, former Buffalo Bills Super Bowl coach Marv Levy, he coached the Chicago Blitz in 1984. You had teams in Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis, and they all did well because they were not in markets that had Major League Baseball teams. So that spring, summertime, focus that a lot of cities had on Major League Baseball, those markets didn't have that burden. So those teams actually did really well during that time. Teams in NFL markets, however, actually had a really difficult time because the NFL, starting to flex its muscle a little bit, did not allow those USFL teams, the Chicago Blitz, let's use that for an example. Right. The NFL's like, you're going to play at Soldier Field? No.
I mean, I don't blame them.
No, I don't either. I mean, if you've got somebody biting at your heels, what are you going to do? Just let them walk into your house and start playing football?
Absolutely not.
No. So, yeah, that was rough on franchises, because then it either forced them to find an alternate site in the same city or to move their franchise on a short notice. So, yeah, that was pretty brutal for them. There was no hard salary cap. It led to runaway and unsustainable spending by teams. Again, another theme that we are picking up on here.
Yeah, finances, man. To beat the NFL, it seems like a lot of people, you got to put in the money in to try to beat the competitor. Something to talk about Jim Kelly. Mm-hmm. I believe it's off that 30 for 30 you were referencing. To my understanding, like, he was going to be drafted in the NFL, but the USFL gave him like a huge offer. I think that he was contemplating like which one he should go to and whatnot, and they gave him a really good deal. Like, they were throwing big time money at these players.
Right. Yeah, and that's ultimately the folly. That, like I said, this is a common thread, a common theme with all these leagues, is that, they're just throwing big money at these names to get brand recognition. And ultimately it puts the franchises in jeopardy because you are trying to establish yourself with these names like Jim Kelly. Did you know Jerry Rice was actually drafted number 1 by the USFL?
I did not.
Yes. He was actually drafted by the USFL, but he decided to go to the NFL instead.
So great. Well,
right?
It's probably a good decision, obviously.
In hindsight, absolutely. Yeah, but Jerry Rice, I think in the 4 years that the USFL had a draft, only one number 1 pick actually went to the USFL. I can't remember the other names off the top of my head, but obviously Jerry Rice sticks out like a sore thumb because he is a Hall of Fame wide receiver. And Jim Kelly's a Hall of Fame quarterback. Steve Young's a Hall of Fame quarterback. Herschel Walker did not know this, that he is not actually in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, okay.
At least not that I read. I thought he was in the Hall of Fame, but maybe I just didn't read it in the place that I did. But anyway, I digress.
Well, I can't fact check you on that because I don't know. I honestly don't know, and that wouldn't surprise me now that I'm thinking about it. So
Well, he's a big name though.
Yeah,
and
big name.
that's what the USFL was looking for, was name recognition.
no, absolutely, that's crazy. With that said, the USFL, is it a complimentary or a competitive league?
Well, like I said earlier, it was a competitor. I kind of let the cat out of the bag earlier with that, but it was also complimentary. It had the initial 3 seasons in a spring-summer setup, so it was complimentary in the sense that it wasn't directly competing with the NFL, but slowly but surely they started to want to get a piece of the pie, and salaries started getting driven up. Does this sound familiar? Maybe NFL, AFL sort of thing?
Sounds like it.
So there's a gentleman by the name of Donald Trump.
Who?
Donald Trump, President Trump, as we know him these days. He was actually a majority owner of the New Jersey Generals Football Club of the USFL. He voted with other team owners in 1985 to move to a fall schedule in 1986 for that season. Now, this was a business move on behalf of the USFL to force a merger between the NFL and the USFL because they saw the writing on the wall. They're like, we keep losing money. Let's merge. Let's force the NFL's hand to absorb some of the teams. So what they did was that they also sued the NFL for having a monopoly, quote unquote, on professional football in the United States of America. The reason they did this was just to secure funds so that they could continue on operating as a league. So under this kind of shoddy plan, to sue the NFL to see if they could get some money from them, they actually won the lawsuit. However, they only got $1.
Okay, so explain.
So they only got $1 because the jury awarded them the win, I guess. They won the lawsuit, but with all the attorney's fees and everything like that, the USFL was basically losing all of this money to try and stick it to the NFL when they already were deeply in the red on their finances and everything. And the jury awarded them they won the lawsuit, but they only got $1 because the jury thought that, okay, the judge can go back and amend that amount in the future. But since it was an antitrust law, they tripled it to $3.
Who?
Oh, man. So the USFL kind of came out of it with egg on their face because, they had lost over $163 million. And they wanted to recoup those losses by forcing the NFL into a merger, and the NFL didn't bite. They did not merge any of the teams from the USFL into the NFL. Although, they had a team in Arizona, and the Cardinals moved from Chicago to Arizona in 1988. They had a team in Alabama, once again, just to throw that out there. But, LA, the LA Express, they didn't have an NFL team at the time. The Baltimore Stars, obviously the Ravens came along 10 years later. Jacksonville Bulls, you got the Jaguars about 10 years later. And, San Antonio, that's been kicked around as an idea, but that's kind of in Dallas's territory, so that's probably why they don't have a pro franchise in the NFL.
What an interest. $3. I'm stuck up on the $3. That's 3 McChickens from McDonald's if they wanted to go out to dinner,
it's
to
true.
Celebrate their victory, quote unquote.
Funny thing is, they never cashed a check.
Ha!
They never cashed that check. It was a very, very hollow victory.
I can imagine.
Yeah, no
Goodness
doubt.
gracious. Okay, so the USFL, competitor / complimentary, then merge.
Competitor, complimentary, complicated.
Complicated. I like it. All right, so let's talk about the Arena Football League. Arena football. And what about that?
Well, like you mentioned with Kurt Warner being a part of the Iowa Barnstormers at the beginning of this segment, yeah, Arena Football League's been around for a minute. They were established in 1987. It's weird how these leagues have very little overlap sometimes. But Arena Football, established in 1987, after USFL folded in 1986. They had teams, double-digit number of teams from 92 to 2005, anywhere between 10 in 1993 to 19 in 2007. They were doing pretty well. I remember games on ESPN2 getting aired in the mid-90s. I remember watching the Arizona Rattlers, and I kind of adopted them and like, hey, this is they got a cool logo. They got the snake on there and everything, and this is pretty fun to watch.
Right.
It's a lot faster-paced game than the NFL, just because it's a 50-yard field and you're playing in indoor stadiums, and it was a good time. And being a kid in middle school, I'm like, I like this. This is fun. This is fun. The AFL actually, they established a minor league called AF2, and that was from 2000 to 2009. We'll come back to that here in a second. The AFL actually jumped to a contract to NBC from 2003 to 2006. I remember the commercials airing on NBC. You know, you had John Bon Jovi, who was a majority holder in the Philadelphia Soul. You had John Elway, who was a kind of a co-owner of the Colorado Crush. Like, the AFL was starting to pick up steam, you know, from 2003 to 2006. But, yeah, it was more of a summertime league before moving to NBC, but then NBC wanted to push the season to late January so it'd start right after the Super Bowl. You know, it was like, there was a commercial I saw on YouTube. It said, "Are you suffering from PSSD or post-Super Bowl stress disorder or pissed?" That was the commercial. I'm like, are you serious? It's very clever. But, yeah, obviously, you know, they're not on NBC anymore. So it kind of dissolved after 3 years. I know, it's pretty ridiculous, that commercial. But, hey, Boise actually had a Arena Football 2 league. They had a team called the Boise Burn. They were around for 3 years, from 2006 to 2009. The AF2 dissolved after no existing teams filed paperwork to continue on. None. That's brutal. That is brutal that your league is doing that bad, that no teams want to continue on.
You know what's funny to me, CC, is that I went to Burn. Did you ever get the opportunity to go to a Burn game?
I did not. No, dude, unfortunately, I did not.
We went to one. A group of friends and I, and group of friends and me, went to a game. Wow, that's beyond the point.
This is grammar talk, dude, with Shane Larson.
My goodness, we went to a game. We all painted our chests, the BURN, and we had a funny story with that. But we went there and we lifted up our shirts during the touchdown. But that game, like the stadium, the arena, CenturyLink Arena, was packed. It was packed. Every game they were packed.
That sounds great.
That sounds awesome. So fun. Like, you had a couple local guys, like Bart Hendricks was technically the quarterback, but then he ended up not playing or whatever. But, like, I mean, you had Tim Gilligan was there. Lee Marks, I believe, he was running back for Boise State. He was with them. Levi Madrietta was there. Like, all these local guys that were actually really good at football, they were playing for the team.
Nice.
Coach Lee Leslie was well known. He was the coach. It was so exciting. And honestly, let me tell you this cool little tidbit from that game. We were playing Oklahoma City, same year that Boise State beat Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. So it was kind of like, it's like their pro team versus ours. Okay, it comes down to the very last play of the game. They're coming up to the end zone. They're like 10 yards away. It's the last play of the game because the time was running out. If they score, they win. If we stop them, we win. Like, it was crazy how it was working out. Fast-paced game. Yes, highly fast-paced game. That's what I was trying to say. Anyways, quarterback throws it into the corner of the end zone, hits the referee. Referee gets knocked out with the ball. Ball hits the ground, it's incomplete, but he hits the referee. And he rocketed the ball, drills the referee. Referee just drops. So the crowd's going nuts. But then at the same time, we're like, did that just happen? We watched the game end because the referee got knocked out with a throw as hard as he darted it into the corner of the end zone.
Oh, my goodness.
Anyways, it was a lot of energy. I don't know why it folded. It was so much fun going to that.
Well, it was the league in general. You know, I mean, the parent Arena Football League actually folded. Well, they didn't fold. They ceased operations in 2009.
Okay.
So once the parent league did that, the AFL2 or the AF2, forgive me, they kind of followed suit. They're just like, and all the teams were just like, okay, you know, this is the business plan. They were gonna cease operations for a year and then regroup.
Okay.
So you had the league reorganizing in 2009. Both the AFL and AF2 decided the teams to take on teams from both leagues to reorganize the AFL and just kind of regroup and just, you know, start from square one, start from scratch again. And so, you know, average attendance suffered greatly. You know, it was 13,000 per game in 2008. It went down to 8,000 in 2010 after the break. It was rough. It's kind of sad. I hadn't heard about the league in a long time, and so I looked it up. There's only 5 teams in the AFL now.
That's so sad.
And they're all on the East Coast. Like Philadelphia, you know, the Philadelphia Soul is really the only one I can think of off the top of my head. And Ron Jaworski from ESPN, he's a majority owner in the Philadelphia Soul.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just like, wow, man, 5 teams left. They're looking to expand again, but it's just like, you know, AFL was a good league for a while there. You know, had a lot of teams, had exposure, but it's just like, it's small potatoes now,
Yeah,
you know?
it's small and it's hard. I mean, the sport of football, it's tough to like get a lot of money coming in with a sport that's kind of different. But that's what was cool about it. And they had all these indoor leagues too, and they still exist. Like
They do, yeah.
Idaho had the Idaho Stallions, and I think they lasted a year or 2 years. Back in the day, it was the indoor football league of some kind. It was one of the very minor leagues of arena. But like that game is just unique in itself. So that's why I loved it. But I guess it just didn't get the popularity.
It didn't. I don't know. After the NBC debacle and. Yeah, finances. Once again,
yes.
it's a financial thing. You just got to establish roots in a community, and when the whole league is toxic in regards to financial hemorrhaging, it's just like, what can you do? What can you do, man?
So unfortunate, man.
Know.
So arena football, competitor or complimentary?
Totally complimentary. Yeah, especially when ESPN bought stake in the company in the early, I want to say like the mid 2000s. Like right after the NBC 3 years that they were there. Yeah, definitely complimentary, not looking to compete with the NFL for sure.
Gotcha. Let's move on to the CFL. Talk about the CFL.
Canadian Football League.
Ooh, Canada.
Talking about Canada when we're talking about U.S. pro leagues? Oh, yes.
What is this?
Oh, yes. So in the mid-'90s, the Canadian dollar was on the downturn. It was suffering greatly. And the CFL, the Canadian Football League, wanted to see if they could broach the U.S. market to regain some of their losses. So what they did, U.S. expansion occurred from 1993 to 1995. So, the slumping Canadian dollar, it also caused 2 NHL teams to go to America. The Quebec Nordiques moved to Colorado to become the Avalanche, and the Winnipeg Jets moved to Phoenix to become the Phoenix Coyotes. So that was another direct correlation because of the Canadian dollar suffering in the mid-1990s. So the CFL, they had the Sacramento Gold Miners joining the league in 1993, followed by the Baltimore CFL Colts, which they had to change to Stallions because the NFL raised a stink about that. The Shreveport Pirates and the Las Vegas Posse joined the league in 1994.
Interesting.
Yeah, Baltimore actually averaged about 37,000 people at their games. They played in the old Memorial Stadium where the Baltimore Orioles played, and yeah, they were doing gangbusters.
That's more than the Chargers are doing right now, right? In Los Angeles.
In the 28,000 seat StubHub Center, that is more than the LA Chargers are doing right now.
That's so crazy. Okay, continue.
Yeah. So, yeah, 1995 came around. Vegas folded. Sacramento folded due to low attendance and profit losses. So the San Antonio Texans came in, the Memphis Mad Dogs, and guess who? Birmingham, the Birmingham Barracudas. And all the teams averaged attendance in the tens of thousands. So they were doing pretty well. The big 3 networks in America, CBS, ABC, and NBC, they refused to cover the league because they didn't have any teams in major markets like New York or LA so they refused to cover the league. The Browns, they ultimately forced the Baltimore franchise to become defunct because the Browns decided to pick up shop and move to Baltimore to become the Ravens. By January and February of 1996, all 5 of the U.S. CFL franchises were defunct.
But the CFL is still standing right now.
Correct.
With all their Canadian teams. It's crazy to hear how they had the U.S. teams. I did before you even talked to me about this, I had no idea of those franchises,
right?
And where they were. But it is kind of cool to see that they're still going strong now, holding their own with their own kind of organization, the way they run things. Mm-hmm. Would you say though? I mean, the way it started with the U.S. teams, the U.S. franchises, and everything, and even though they're still going today, would you consider the CFL a competitor or a complementary league to the National Football League?
I would definitely view it as a complementary league. Okay. They weren't trying to compete with the NFL in the mid-'90s when they were approaching the U.S. market. They were trying to save their bacon. Their Canadian bacon, if you will.
Boom, boom.
Ha-cha, ha-cha-cha.
But
I digress. So yeah, they were trying to save their bacon. And, yeah, it's called complementary. It still is to this day. I mean, you've got a lot of Canadian players that, play up in Canada because of CFL rules and things like that. And then you've got the NFL players that if they, you got players like Doug Flutie who also played in the CFL. Warren Moon, got his start in the CFL. So it's kind of a proving grounds. And, if players are getting up there in age, I mean, I know Vince Young wanted to play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders eventually. I don't think it came to fruition, but I think Vince Young was broaching the idea a little bit. So
I just watched something on ESPN about that.
Yeah.
What was that?
I have no idea.
Vince Young, the Vince Young thing. I just watched it. It was on it was like a Sports Center special or Saturday, whatever. Can't remember. Yeah, anyways.
Not sure. No worries. But yeah, CFL always kind of been a complimentary, kind of a lower tier, but they also play in the off season of the NFL.
Right.
So yeah, but it overlaps a little bit when it comes into the fall. But
Gotcha. Okay. Let's move on to the World League of Football / NFL Europe.
Alrighty. So Paul Tagliabue, the former NFL commissioner, he had this idea to establish professional football in Europe in 1989. Their first season was in the spring of 1991. They actually incorporated 7 North American franchises and 3 European teams for the first couple seasons. So you had the Birmingham Fire, Birmingham, Alabama, getting a lot of love, the Montreal Machine, New York, New Jersey Knights, the Ohio Glory, the Orlando Thunder, the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, the Sacramento Surge, there goes Sacto again,
Okay.
and the San Antonio Riders. Now, they only did this for a couple seasons because they really wanted to focus on Europe. And so what they did was they regrouped and rebooted after, I want to say the 1992 or 1993 season, and then they came back in 95 with just European clubs in Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom. So yeah, they came back, they rebooted, and they offered a lot of good opportunities. And I actually am writing an article about this, about leagues and foreign leagues that gave North American players another opportunity to play professionally. Stay tuned for that.
Yes.
It's going to be coming
for that one.
coming this coming Tuesday. So, but yeah, like you mentioned, Kurt Warner played in the NFL Europe. Carolina Panthers Super Bowl quarterback Jake Delhomme played in the NFL Europe. And Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl winning quarterback Brad Johnson also played in the NFL Europe. But unfortunately, it just didn't have a whole lot of name recognition. And
Right.
by 2007, the final year, the MVP of the league was JT O'Sullivan, who at best was a third-string quarterback for the Chicago Bears. So the league was also losing $30 million a year. The NFL actually sponsored the NFL Europe. So
Right.
to kind of jump the gun a little bit, I will answer the question you're going to ask. It was a complimentary league. It was a spring league. They played football in the spring. The NFL Europe was sponsored by the National Football League, and unfortunately, due to lack of name recognition and lack of players it was cranking out, it didn't, and obviously the $30 million it was losing, it just didn't survive.
Gotcha. And remind me at the end of this, we're going to kind of go back to the NFL Europe. I want to touch base on that. So once again, name recognition, finances, this, like you said, this is kind of playing a role in every one of these leagues.
Common
that you've
themes,
mentioned.
common threads, you bet.
Let's go into the XFL.
Oh, Lordy have mercy on
man.
the XFL. So Vince McMahon, the chairman of the WWF, he actually wanted to buy the Canadian Football League in 1999. I did not know this until
know that
doing
either.
research here. He wanted to buy the Canadian Football League to migrate it south. He wanted to bring the league into the United States. And imagine that. The owners of the league said no. They're like, no. They did not want that to occur. They wanted the CFL to stay in Canada. So Vince McMahon decided to team up with NBC. So the WWF and NBC were 50% owners of the XFL. Dick Ebersol, worked with Vince McMahon to establish a Saturday Night Main Event, the WWF show that they had in the 80s that highlighted Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and all the big names in the 80s. So they already had that connection, and they wanted to establish a football league. And they put teams in Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, Las Vegas. They all got franchises again in the XFL. NBC actually lost its broadcast rights to the NFL in 1998. They were specifically airing AFC, games. And now who has those rights? CBS. Right, exactly. So in 1998, that's when the passing of that torch occurred, although it was kind of like, give me that torch.
Right.
Not really a passing, more than a yank from CBS. So, So this took place during the NFL offseason. It encouraged rougher play, and it really emphasized some silly WWF-like tactics, like keeping the cameras on the cheerleaders and, emphasizing TNA over, anything else really. And so it was it was a lot for show, a lot of, dog and pony show sort of thing. So, but the names of the teams as well was really kind of WWF, WWE now, but at the time WWF, it focused on either a lack of sanity or criminal activity. Listen to this real quick, Shane. Orlando Rage, Los Angeles Extreme, San Francisco Demons, the Memphis Maniacs with an X instead of C at the end.
Yeah.
Gotta be extreme. The Chicago Enforcers, New York, New Jersey Hitmen, Las Vegas Outlaws, and the Birmingham Blast. Now, in the 60s, Birmingham had a lot of bombings in regards to the civil rights movement. So naturally, the people in Alabama got a little upset by the initial name. So they changed their name to the Thunderbolts or the Bolts. But yeah.
Gotcha.
Just,
okay.
I mean, you are establishing a league on the premise of violence. Like specifically, we're going to be rougher. We're going to be violent. Our names indicated. It just was doomed from the beginning. It just wasn't going to work out. So the opening night drew a 9.5 Nielsen rating, which is great.
Right.
Next
I
week,
remember that.
Next week, 4.6. Another good 30 for 30 ESPN have. This was the XFL. That was another good one.
It was a great one.
Yeah. ESPN does a bang-up job on those. And between, the violence and the accusations of being rigged because it was associated with the WWF.
Right.
And Bob Costas, NBC's own sports personality, actually went on late night talk shows and would tell the host, "Oh yeah, when I had this brainchild about a decade ago of mediocre high school football and scantily clad cheerleaders, XFL stole my idea." Very sarcastic, very trite, and Bob Costas. If you don't have your own network personalities on board, you're just asking for trouble. It lasted one season, 2001.
What's funny, and you mentioned the teams, and it was just it was kind of like a joke. It's what it seemed. I was so hyped up for it. I was in 7th grade when it started, and I was excited to watch it because it was all hyped up. The football was a different color. It was everything was different.
Oh yeah.
It was such a disappointment. But the thing was, the players could make their own names, and one of the most famous XFL players is He Hate Me.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Rod Smart. And Rod Smart, that was like he was one of the few, and I think he was one of the only that actually made it somewhere after that. I was reading up on him right here. He was part of the Las Vegas Outlaws. He was there. He made a name for himself while he was there in the XFL, and then he ended up actually having a pretty successful professional career. He played in the CFL, and then he went to the NFL and played for quite a while.
Didn't he end up on the Panthers?
Yeah, he was in the Panthers, and they won the NFC Championship in 2003.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, he was with the Eagles, with the Panthers, and again with the Raiders. I mean, he actually made a pretty good career out of it, but he was the only one. But to go back to your point of lack of talent, like the names, kind of in the NFL Europe, the same thing with the XFL. They just didn't have names. They didn't have big name players. Therefore, the play was extremely poor. And that's kind of how that documentary was talking about on the 30 for 30.
Right.
It's like, I didn't realize how bad it was.
And that was the thing with NFL Europe as well, is that people aren't going to watch crappy football.
Oh, no.
People are not going to pay money to watch bad football.
Unless you're the Browns, and that's just all you got there, So they'll watch it.
Oh, hey, I'm glad Cleveland has their championship with the Cavs, but man, that fan base is hurting NFL-wise.
They're loyal, though. You got to give them credit.
Got to give them credit there. Now, you want to talk about name recognition. The only other 2 names I could find for XFL, Tommy Maddox.
Oh, yeah, Maddox.
He was the MVP of the league, the one and only season that they had, and the late Rashaan Salaam.
Oh, yeah, Rashaan Salaam.
He played for the Memphis Maniacs. So, Heisman Trophy winner out of Colorado, University of Colorado. He actually played for the Memphis Maniacs and led the team in rushing. So,
yes, that's right.
Yes.
So those are probably the only 3 names I know. We're going to also go back to that before we finish up. Make sure to remind me NFL Europe and the XFL.
Okay.
What was I going to say? I don't even remember what I was going to say about the NFL Europe. Oh, no, actually, yes, I do. But anyways, UFL. Let's talk about the UFL.
Okay. So thanks for sticking with us. I know it's a lot of leagues, but we're almost done. So the UFL, the United Football League, started play in October of 2009. They played for 4 seasons. The last one was cut short in October of 2012. They wanted to target non-NFL markets. They got coaches like Dennis Green, Jay Gruden, Jim Fassel, Kurt Schottenheimer. They all coached in the league at one time or another. So I actually did a piece on the Las Vegas Locomotives, or the Locos as they called them, for the Pro Sports in Vegas article that I did.
Yep.
And they were actually very successful. They were in the championship game every year that they had it. They won the first 2 championships, and then they lost the third one in 2011. However, the on-field success actually didn't translate to attendance numbers because the last game that the Locos played at home only drew 601 people. Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. Those attendance figures, that's why they stopped the season, because they were losing money hand over fist.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 601 people. I mean, stadium situation was very shoddy, very uncertain, I should say, in Las Vegas. You know, they weren't sure if they were going to play at the UNLV's stadium or another football stadium in town. It was just a mess. So the league suspended operations after this home game. They cited lack of profits and poor attendance figures league-wide. Now, you had the New York Sentinels. You had the Hartford Colonials, which is a name that we didn't really hear a whole lot in the other leagues. But you had the Las Vegas Locos. You had the California Redwoods, which actually played in AT&T Park, but then they moved to Sacramento once again. Then you had Florida, Virginia. They were, franchise basically moved from Florida to Virginia. And then you had the Omaha Nighthawks. So
interesting.
Yeah. So again, non-NFL markets.
Crazy. So complimentary or competitive?
They wanted to be competitive against the NFL. They were complimentary in a sense because they had, players, but they wanted to, obviously with the coaches I just listed off, they wanted to lure the big names in there so that they could compete against the NFL in the bigger in the non-NFL markets. So
okay,
yeah, they were actually a direct competitor, which I was kind of surprised because they were a spring league.
All right.
So even though they were a spring league, they were a direct competitor to the NFL.
And just to make sure I confirm here, CC, the XFL, I'm not sure if I asked this question or not, but I just wanted to confirm, competitor or complimentary. I can't remember if I asked that.
Oh, Vince McMahon was not shy in saying that they were a direct competitor to the NFL. The X, Vince would say, did not stand for Extreme Football League because there was actually already another league that was named that. Since the NFL has and probably always will be referred to as the No Fun League, they're getting a little better, but the XFL made it a point to say that they're the Extra Fun League.
Oh.
It didn't officially stand for that, but the XFL was just the XFL.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely a competitor.
Straight up. Okay, so the vast majority were competitors. Now, I hope you guys learned as much as I did. This is an immense amount of information. As always, CC's always bringing the knowledge. He's dropping bombs. Boom. We're learning so much with him, so I appreciate you, CC. Thank you so much for this. Before we get going, I want to talk about whether or not you believe, like, what do you think about these leagues and how it helped the future of the NFL as far as that's concerned?
Well, something that the NFL was good at doing was that they culled the good ideas from these rival leagues and they adopted them so that they could be more successful. I mean, the AFL was a prime example of that. I mean, ultimately they merged, but you had different slight little variations on rules and niches and things like that. The NFL Europe actually served as a kind of a proving ground of rule changes, like the overtime rule that that was instituted in 2012, I want to say. They actually experimented with that in NFL Europe. So you had, one team gets possession. If they score a touchdown, game's over.
Right.
But if they kick a field goal, then the other team has an opportunity to answer. So the NFL actually started that in the NFL Europe. So obviously being owned by the NFL, that was kind of a different dynamic.
Right.
But with, the USFL, the USFL was, they kind of, I'll have to look at my notes here again, but let me go back to the XFL while I'm doing that. The XFL actually, the sky cams that they have running along.
Yes. I was going to bring that up.
Yes. So the sky cams actually came from the XFL, and they were used in the preseason right after the XFL folded, and then Sunday Night Football on ESPN in 2002 started using it on a regular basis. So you had that sliding, sky cam, and yeah, the XFL actually pioneered that, which is kind of random that you could get such a nugget of gold from such a pile of crap that was the XFL.
Isn't that interesting? I bet the NFL guys that are sitting there, they're like, thanks, McMahon. I appreciate you trying. You go ahead and sit over there. We're going to take your ideas from you. Boom.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly. The USFL, I think ultimately what something that the NFL was really good of is looking on these minor leagues in the USFL. You had Arizona, you had Baltimore, you had Jacksonville, you had LA, who didn't have an NFL team at the time. The NFL was good to keep their ear to the ground and notice and say, okay, which one of these markets would be good? Mm-hmm. You had Raleigh-Durham in one of the minor leagues, which eventually broached the market for the Carolina Panthers. Yeah, it was just, if there's anything that the NFL is good at, it's putting its ear to the ground and saying, okay, these minor leagues are not going to succeed because they don't have the financial backing. They're going to throw a lot of money at our players. We may suffer for 2, 3, 4 years. But where can we put NFL franchises in the future? I mean, look at all the Vegas franchises that these minor leagues had. Who's moving to Vegas in 2020?
Raiders.
The Raiders. The Raiders.
Yes. You're much better at that than I am.
Just raspy voice. So,
and to branch off of that too, the NFL Europe probably gave us the idea of European football. Like, if we're looking at putting someone over there. That's why they continue to have NFL games over there to test that market.
Exactly. Yeah. Right after they folded the NFL Europe, they started the NFL International Series, where 2 NFL teams during the regular season play a game at Wembley Stadium in London. And they've done that since 2007, the same year that the NFL Europe folded. Now they're branching out and they're playing other games. I want to say at Tottenham's. They're building a new stadium, and they want to play more NFL games at where Tottenham is.
Okay.
As well. So
there you go.
They're broadening their footprint a little bit, but they have not played a game, an NFL game, exhibition or otherwise, on the mainland in Europe, like Germany or Spain, since they played a series of exhibition games from 91 to 94 in Germany. Okay. So that's kind of interesting that they're neglecting that market a little bit, but I guess you can only do so much when you have to fly players and worry about jet lag and things like that. So
it's interesting to me, and I know they've mentioned Mexico as another one. I wonder if the Continental Football League had anything to do with that, with the having Mexico as a fan base. They've played a few games down there in Mexico since I can remember. Not a ton. They don't focus on it as much as they focused on Europe, but I know that's something that's been in the discussion. Should they put a team in Mexico? So maybe they're looking at those little, like you said, they got their eye out there. They're looking. They're like, well, you guys continue to run your leagues, do your thing.
Yep.
And we'll kind of just, sit back and analyze.
Well, and Memphis is a good example. They keep broaching the market in Birmingham, but Alabama, Crimson Tide is just so prevalent down there. Sacramento, it's a curiosity why they keep going back to Sacramento for all these leagues. It's a big city. The only game in town is the Kings, and that's during the fall. So it's like, it makes sense to have, the biggest financial state in the union, California. Why not put a semi-pro team there in Sacramento?
Right.
Why not give it a shot? They have Sacramento State has a 22,000 seat football stadium, so why not?
Interesting, man. All right, CC, I appreciate you joining me, man. Is there any final words you got for us before you leave? What about your article? Let's talk about that real quick. Article's coming next Tuesday?
Article's going to be coming up this coming Tuesday. It's going to be specifically focused on players that get a second opportunity outside of North America in football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and kind of twisted around in soccer, because the MLS isn't exactly the premier league in international play. So again, stay tuned for that. I kind of touch on the NFL Europe. Actually, I do touch on the NFL Europe because that's the league I'm focusing on in professional football. So stay tuned for that. It's coming down the pike.
Awesome. So you guys get to hear CC on today, Friday, when this launches. So Friday, and then again on Tuesday, you can read his stuff. Get a lot of CC in the next week. I love it. All right, man. So for you guys out there, again, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, tune in. You can listen to it on Facebook. Go to my website, thegametimeguru.com. You can find the podcast there. Wherever you want to find it, do it. I would appreciate if you could leave me a review on iTunes. It helps me out. And share this with your friends. Get it out there for everyone to hear. But as always, pleasure talking to you guys, and we'll talk to you next week. This is the Game Time Guru. Out.